Are the names of the books of the Bible named after who wrote them? If not, who did write them? This was a great question, simple Bible question. I think you guys could think in several categories of your questions. You could think in Bible study, you could think in ethics, you could think in biblical counseling questions, relational matters, wisdom issues. This is just a good old question about the Bible. Who wrote the books of the Bible? Some of the books of the Bible are about events. So we have books like Genesis, Exodus, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Judges. Those are time periods and events. The Bible has these books included to tell us the history of God's faithfulness. In fact, if you remember, when we studied the book of Acts, Paul had a way of speaking about the history of God's faithfulness to the Jewish people as a way of then getting to the faithfulness of Jesus Christ in our life, that ultimately all of this was climaxing towards Christ. So the Bible can be broken up in genres, the Bible can be broken up in historical timeline, but there are many books that don't bear the name of the author. Rather, they are named about the event by which it took place. Then let's think about some other books. There's the books of the law. So there are books like Leviticus or Deuteronomy or Numbers. Those books are telling us about the law of God. It was the way, according to the Old Testament, by which we had to earn our righteousness. There's several different laws. There's the Mosaic law and the Davidic law, and these different laws were telling us how we were supposed to live. Ultimately, Christ came, and he said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. So these books are still important to us. In fact, I'm in one of my reading plans in a book of the law. It can seem a little boring at times. What is all this getting at? But all of this is showing us how they were supposed to act to please the Lord. One thing I think about when reading the books of the law is I'm reading these books knowing I can never do all of this. Not without Christ, not without his help. So the books of the law should prompt us, as Paul got to in Acts, to worship the Lord all the more. Now, there are some books who are named after the key character of the book. It doesn't mean that they necessarily wrote it, but it's the main person who's in it. So Esther, Daniel, think about Job, Joshua, Ruth. These are names of books because they're named after the main character that we find within that book. Then I noted that there are some different types of literature. I said that already. There's different genres, but there's poetic. There's things like the law, which I already mentioned, the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, telling us kind of the history of God's people. And then there are some that are prophetic books, books like Jeremiah, or Amos, or Micah, or Hosea, or Joel, or Habakkuk. These are all books that are named after the prophets. And then we get to the books of the New Testament, and these are not always named after the person who wrote them. Some of them are. We see the books of John, the letters of John, but Paul's letters, for example, they're named after the person who received them. So they're not named after who wrote them. So to answer your question, are they named after who wrote them? No, not all books are named after who wrote them. But here's what I would say. It's important for you to continue to understand the context of a book. Who is this written to? What time period was it written? And what was the main issue it was addressing? And we live in a time in history where you can find the answers to those questions in the front of every study Bible, at the beginning of every book. Those are usually in there, or even just a good old Google search. You'll be able to find who wrote this book, why did they write this book, and what's the main purpose of this book. But it's important for you to continue to understand the context of the books that you're reading. So that's a good question, a great, straightforward biblical question.